Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I wanted to talk about The Idiot by Elif Botman. The Idiot is a story about Selin, and it's her very first year at Harvard, and she is Turkish American. And technically speaking, there doesn't seem to really be a plot in this book. It's kind of just technically kind of reminds me of like just a stream of consciousness format, except delivered much more in a way that you can tell Celin's really thinking about her actions or things that have happened to her, but as well as a lot of this sort of internal monologue, so to speak. But it seems like Celin's big sort of obstacle here is not only trying to navigate her very first year at Harvard or just in college in general, but also probably things like moving away from her family, especially between her relationship with her mother, which I really like, and also, of course, her very romantic relationship with a classmate named Ivan. And so whenever I first started reading this book, I thought it really would dive into sort of that romance genre, but I don't think it does at all. I think there's definitely still a good dose of sort of these interactions between Selin and Ivan, but I also really appreciate the other interactions that Selin has with other characters, like one of her classmates and friends, Svetlana, as well as, like I said, between Selin and her mother. And it's not even really a spoiler because on the back of this book, it does tell you eventually that like Selin and Ivan kind of have this budding relationship, and the fact that the second half of this book does take place whenever Selin does go off to Hungary to kind of further her knowledge about the world and her knowledge about language. What I really like about this book is that I really thought going into it was going to be really pretentious, kind of the idea of like a really elite liberal arts school, and their emphasis kind of on studying language and kind of how language is like a formula for life. And they do even mention something in here I remember learning in psychology whenever I studied it in undergrad about this theory that the language we learn to develop is how we end up seeing reality. It's really cool because sometimes in here Selin does give us insight about how some words in maybe Hungarian are similar to words in Turkish, but they have different meanings. And I think one of them was like consciousness with something else, and Selin really thinks that over about how it portrays to her own life. Really the whole book is just Selin kind of using fate as like this guidance or a mystical force in her life, especially between herself and her relationship with Ivan. But there's really honest points in here that feel so understated and even quite beautiful that Selin really thinks about being like an 18 or 19-year-old. Like, how does she end up getting herself to these points? I feel like she thinks that her life is just a series of places and actions she happened to find herself in, but not really a chance of really things she's done for herself. This is made most apparent in two instances. The first instance is whenever Selin, I think this is the point when she's in Hungary, and she kind of thinks about when she's with her host family, if whether or not she could have really been a changing factor in the host family she ended up being placed with. This is made more clear because we do get a lot of really fun and insightful kind of characters here that exist in the same time as Selin, with her fellow kind of travelers from America that are in the same program as her, studying abroad kind of and teaching people English. And with those characters, we get to know their very slight experiences with their host families. Like one girl, I think her name was Cheryl, I think she ends up with the host family where it's just a guy that is sort of a handyman and he thinks she's really dumb, but it's Cheryl's insistence that she gets placed with someone that doesn't really speak a lot of English because she thinks that that makes the experience a lot more immersive. But also, again, thinking of Selin's friend Svetlana, they have this conversation that I really loved about what it kind of means to have people kind of orbiting around your life or yourself, and how easy it is to think how close your life could be different because your life feels like it's made up of the people you surround yourself with. That's at least how I took it. Svetlana explains it as kind of this idea of we all make up stories to make ourselves kind of happy or to make sense of our lives. That totally makes sense thinking of the narrative of each other's lives, especially with how Selin thinks of her relationship with Ivan. And speaking of Ivan, I have heard that he's like this very detestable guy and that I thought I would like immediately hate him. Kind of do hate Ivan because he is this kind of like really charming guy, but I do have to respect kind of he's kind of straightforward with Selin saying, like, this isn't really something I see, but I just appreciate you existing as a person, and I really admire that. But Selene is also held accountable because she knows these things going in, and I really thought after a while that these interactions between Ivan and Selene, whether through email or in real life, that it was going to get sort of dry or kind of predictable. But each time their dialogue was so refreshing, and I was really captivated by them. I really loved both of those characters. But for me, I feel like the shtick that I heard about this book around booktube or in life is that the power of kind of email or these beginning technologies. I think L.F. Botman specifically kind of thought of this idea of when to place this story, because for me, the way I took it is that with email, we know even then, the beginning of email, we all know how used to social media we are now, but we can't really use fate as something to depend on, because we know we become more responsible with our fate when it comes to communicating with people, because we can email them or text them or call them, or in the case of this book, find a payphone in Hungary and call people that you want to call. So I think that creates a big discussion about whether it's Selene trying to like play the waiting game or try to stay strong, or maybe you could argue that Selene is playing hard to get. I think the whole point of this book isn't necessarily about romance, but I think it's kind of demystifying romance to a point where we try to make our relationships with people, whether platonic or romantic, as organic and genuine as possible. This has made more clear to me how it seems like it's becoming Ivan and Selene's kind of like thing that they don't really like sleep, they just stay up together. And they even do this while on a plane from somewhere in America to Hungary or Paris or something. And really quickly talking about structure, this book isn't told in chapters, it's really just told through a series of paragraphs, as well as a few different sections like months of the year. And at first that really bothered me because I didn't know really how to really gauge myself with the story or when to really put it down. But I actually found it much more rewarding that this book wasn't told in chapters, because otherwise I think that would have made things feel really stiff or formulaic. I much more appreciated it this way, and I think the way the novel is structured does make it kind of even more refreshing that way. So that's my review of The Idiot. I believe I've heard that it's shortlisted or longlisted, depending whatever it is, for the Women's Prize in Fiction, maybe. This is a good time to say I'm not really good at keeping up with literary prizes. I usually just wait until the shortlists are announced, but I've seen the long list for the Man Booker this year, and it seems like a really good selection of books, so I'll have to check that out. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.